Live. We're doing it live.
Yeah.
All right, welcome everybody to a new truth seeking edition Wednesday tonight. Got a early expedition, well, early in our schedule. I'm heading out of town, um, so yeah, we're gonna cover tonight. We're gonna be talking about the replication crisis in science and taking a look at how people are doing their research and how a lot of these studies can't get replicated on the research papers that are getting put out. And so we're going to talk all about that tonight and get dive into that topic. So, what's up, Jay? It's been a couple weeks since we got together. So, how have you been?
Life's good. Um, I had a minor injury. We were talking about playing pickleball. I started picking up pickleball a few weeks ago. Really enjoying it. So I appreciate all my friends getting me into it. And I don't know if I have some sort of Achilles tendonitis or I messed up my calf, but it's a really minor thing. It's more of an annoyance than anything else. But I'm really enjoying playing pickleball. So thanks to all my friends for introducing me to it.
Yeah, man, and those sports. My coworker, he's been getting into curling, man, since it's on the Olympics, and
Yeah.
got into a little discussion. Did you know that they have anti-sex beds at the Olympics? You know,
Right.
you get all
Someone
these
has to explain
you get
this
all
to me.
you get all these athletes together that are just ready to go, and there's I guess there was too much sexual activity between the athletes at one point in time, so you gotta throw in some anti-sex beds in the for the athletes going to the Olympics.
I remember reading about this on Drudge Report years ago that the they were having to import like literally thousands and thousands of condoms, because there was so much, sexual activity going on, not just between the athletes, but like everyone around them as well. And
Yeah,
it's like, okay. And you know what? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I kind of get it because these are young people in
top
the
peak
physical
in the
prime.
peak of their yeah
I get
physical
it.
fitness, man.
And this is the reason why, in my humble opinion, we need to avoid what they call GIT, gender integrated training in the military, where they have males and females in the same platoon. That is a big freaking mistake. And I kudos to the Marine Corps. I think they're the only branch that still has separation of the sexes.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
Yeah, I've work out with one of my buddies that's in the former Marine, and he talks about like you don't want a fat guy on your squad or whatever because you got to be able to carry that dude or whatever
Yep.
for certain things.
Yep.
So yeah, you want to have people that have the same physical capabilities that uh, around around you to be able to carry out the duties and tasks that may need to be done.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then you get a bunch of guys that are all thinking about the women in the squad and stuff like that.
Oh
And
yeah. You take basically a group of people, you separate them from the rest of society, and you pour on a lot of stress, physical and mental stress. That's what's going to happen every single time.
yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, definitely the team dynamics shift when you got
Yeah, they do.
men and women together.
And I've seen this not just in the military, but also in a professional environment. I'm fortunate. I've been involved with some really cool projects in my professional life. And some of these they're called ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning projects, where you switch over to a large system like Oracle or SAP.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be a lot of stress with this sort of thing, and hookups happen left and right on those projects. You know, uh, these people end up spending more time with each other than they do with their own families, and you know they end up hooking up. It's going to happen.
Yep. So tonight we're talking about replication of studies in scientific research. So we'll pull up a little definition for you guys here on what they're talking about with the replication crisis here. So, known as reproducibility or replicability crisis, refers to widespread failures to reproduce published scientific results, because the reproducibility of empirical results is the cornerstone of the scientific method. Such failures undermine credibility of theories and challenge substantial parts of scientific knowledge. And man, I mean, there's so many examples of this and of what we've seen in studies. And if you're not trained on how to look at statistics and how experiments were run and looking at some of these studies and what their findings are, it's pretty easy, I guess, to get swept up in the headline of some study or another giving you some new revelation that smoking, best thing, it's still the best thing, or something like that, so yeah, you can kind of get wrapped up in the latest headline on whatever. I guess COVID was a pretty good example of all this too, with everything that went down and having to trust the science. And the science is, well, the science keeps changing. It's like maybe you need 5 masks and one over your butthole to make sure that you don't get any viruses. So just trust us, though.
Yeah.
Science. We do the science over here.
I think this gets into kind of the core of epistemology, and for the audience, epistemology is essentially the study of the source, the sources and methods of knowledge for the purpose of answering the question, how do we know what we know? And I think it's reasonable that we, as individuals, we kind of have to offload a little bit, or maybe a lot, of studies and investigations to someone else, or sometimes other institutions. There aren't enough hours in a day to try to study all these different things. So I think it's reasonable to offload some of it, but then there has to be a metacognitive shift to, okay, can I verify that the methods, the epistemological methods that these institutions or people are employing are good methods? Because I can't verify every study that they do, but maybe I can at least verify the methodologies that they're employing. And Greg, you brought up the fact you worked as a research engineer, and I think you made a really good point around having to make sure that methodologies were validated ahead of time, or you at least looked at the methodologies that were being employed.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a super important part of doing research, is that you want to write down all the steps that you took and all the calibrations that you did, and basically put as much data detailing all the steps in your process of your research, so that whatever you found could be, you can draw some kind of, have the ability to be able to say whether or not you were on the right track on your hypothesis that you were, thinking of. And then the data should just show what it is. It should just be what it is. And then somebody should be able to take what you did and then, like we're going to be talking about tonight, be able to reproduce similar results to you by following your methodology. And there's a lot of factors in that, and we could talk about different areas of study, because the different sciences, I guess, the social sciences and biological research and material science and systems and chemistry, and all these things have different ways that you're collecting data and how you are formulating the experiment, and how you're doing the statistical analysis on all these things. What what models were you running in your statistical analysis, and things like that. And I think one of the big things in academia is that a lot of these researchers, you kind of you're kind of eating what you kill, and a lot of the times it's based on some kind of hypothesis from a professor that has been doing research in a specific field somewhere, and has a certain hypothesis on where there may be some innovation that could happen, and they want to push that research further. And so you kind of have a little bit of an incentive on that professor's behalf to secure more funding for their research, by showing a certain favorable results for their hypotheses. And there's that aspect of it, and then the folks that are funding the research may have a particular bias as well, which could affect the ethics of the study, and put pressure on the research scientists performing the studies. So there's cherry picking of the data that can happen to make the results seem favorable to the scientist's hypothesis. And then whoever's funding the research may have a vested interest in you showing certain things to be favorable on their behalf. So,
I think one of my favorite examples of that, I think you brought up a good point around who's funding it. If you take a look at Ansel Keys, he's one of the people who really had pushed a lot of the dietary guidelines that we see today, and really pushed the whole concept of low fat, low meat, high plant, high grain consumption. And it turns out he was being funded by a foundation called the Sugar Research Foundation. I think it's changed names since then. And he received a pretty good chunk of change, somewhere on the order, it was like $50,000. Basically, it was a paid endorsement, right? And so, and by the way, if a foundation wants to fund research, I'm all for it. That's not a problem. What I have a problem with is not being open and honest, not being overt about the fact that foundation paid that amount of money to a specific person for that research. So I think that's a huge problem. And I know some people will say, well, that doesn't mean that he necessarily falsified or engaged in fraudulent findings. I agree, but then there's also no reason not to divulge the funding, the source of the funding. If it's good, they should be able to stand up on its merits all on its own. And so, I think that we have literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people just in the United States alone, and probably large parts of the West, who were directly affected by Ansel Keys and the fraud that he perpetrated on the American people, and many of the West, because he took money and he didn't divulge it, and he engaged in essentially fraud that has not been able to be reproduced. And we're seeing this time and time again.
Yeah, and a lot of people have lost faith in a lot of these things in the so-called science, and it seems like it's not. People throw out that the term science, and like it's some kind of and behave that like it's some kind of religion, like a science, like scientism. It's like just because I throw out the term science means that it's
Stamp of approval. That's good enough.
yeah, the stamp of approval on things, and it's really not asking, you know, those fundamental questions of, you know, how do we really know that your conclusions are accurate?
Yeah. So one area that I think Greg and I talked about previously is just within psychology. So there's some major areas like psychology, medicine, social sciences, where we're seeing the replication crisis, the reproducibility crisis rear its ugly head. And within psychology, we had the 2015 Reproducibility Project attempted to replicate 100 prominent psychology studies and found that only 39% of the results could be reproduced. This project became a landmark in highlighting the scope of the replication crisis. And you know, these sorts of things are important. I realize that many of us could say, well, you know, how's that really going to affect me? You know, psychology is not a big deal, right? But the problem is that it does have an effect because it ends up spilling over into areas like government legislation, regulation, politics, popular culture, allocation of funds, like you said, Greg, allocation of funds for scientific research, family law, and family courts. So we end up with these politicians or regulators who then point to these essentially fraudulent studies and say, well, these studies say it, these so-called experts say it, therefore it must be true. Therefore, we need to implement policy and procedure and law and regulation, which reflects what the so-called experts are saying. And that's a huge problem. And so, by the way, if we do have these reproducibility projects that come out and try to debunk a lot of this stuff, what happens? The politicians and the regulators say, well, it's already law, it's already regulation, we can't do anything about it. But you base it on fraudulent activity, on a fraud. But why is it not automatically just rescinded?
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember back in the time that I was working for this research lab, you know, having access to the journals databases and all that for research papers, because some of these the libraries have to pay for access to some of these research papers, and it's, you know, a little bit tough if you're attempting to verify some of these different research projects. To, you know, you have to pay for some of this published research, and it's a little bit difficult to, you know, be able to gain access to some of these things. So, you know, just to access some of the information is a little tricky. But I did find a Sci-Hub. I don't know if you've ever run across that, but yeah, if you want to look into some of these research papers and get behind some of these like paywalls and stuff like that, you know, this Sci-Hub thing allows you to, you know, dive into certain research that might be behind some of those paywalls and stuff.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So were you able to find anything of particular interest on here?
I have looked up different papers on here, and they're basically all you need is the reference, the PMID reference number, and for a research paper, particular research paper, and then you would put that identifying number in there, and you can search for whatever research that you're looking for, or whatever paper you're looking for in there.
Okay. So, you know, for the audience, I think that, you know, providing some specificity around this, some specific examples would be helpful. Things that I found, so we talked about psychology, the 2015 reproducibility project. In medicine, a 2005 paper by John Ioannidis, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, titled "Why Most Published Research Findings Are False," argued that many medical research findings are unreliable due to biases, small sample sizes, and methodological flaws. Just like you just said, Greg, right? I think that what you put out there was a good foundation. Within social sciences, in economics, a 2016 study found that only about 40% of 18 prominent experimental studies could be replicated successfully. Digging a little bit deeper into the Ioannidis 2005 study, "Why Most Published Research Findings Are False," presented a formal argument that under common research conditions, low prior probabilities, selectable analyses, multiple testing, publication bias, the false positive rate in the literature can be alarmingly high. And false positives means that a positive would be we can show some sort of correlation, A causes B, and a false positive would be we think A causes B, but it doesn't actually do that, right? We talked a little bit about the 2015 psychology open reproducibility crisis, attempted to replicate 100 studies from top journals, roughly 36 to 39%. So a third replicated by conventional criteria. Effect sizes were on average about half the original estimates. All right, impact, public recognition of the crisis, and widespread adoption of pre-registration and data sharing in psychology. So it goes like you said, pre-registration, right, is that it's one thing to come up with a hypothesis first and then do the test. It's another thing to say, I'm going to do the test and then come up with a hypothesis. You basically just fit the assertion or the hypothesis to the data, And by the way, by itself, I don't have a problem with anyone doing that, but then don't call it science. That's not science, That's just a study. Many labs in 2013 through 2020 coordinated multi-lab replications of canonical psychological effects across diverse findings. So it had robust replications, and ultimately they were fragile or context dependent, basically moral licensing and some social primate effects showing inconsistent replication. Here's another one, which actually will affect just about every person on the planet. Cancer biology, 2014 to 2020, attempted to reproduce selected high-impact preclinical cancer studies. Only a minority reproduced the main effects. Even when effects replicated, magnitudes were often smaller, all right, and the impact being heightened scrutiny of preclinical pipelines. So I want to say something in fairness to the medical industry and the oncology industry. Those pipelines are really deep, they're very long, and I'm sure they are very expensive. So I have nothing but great sympathy for these pipelines, in terms of trying to go from hypothesis to treatment or medication. That's a long cycle. But I think we made things worse by adding in basically fraudulent studies that cannot be reproduced. That does nothing but decrease the credibility, and also it dilutes the funding for the studies that actually do have solid methodologies.
There's a lot of especially in the medical research, there's the whole pharmaceutical industry, which is often tied to the funding of a lot of these research studies, and there's the whole NIH and the pharmaceutical industry being really tied to each other, that it's not really a non-biased study. It's
Mhm.
a lot of it is to make the pharmaceutical company have some, show a good light towards certain pharmaceuticals. And if you go, back into the history of this whole thing in our modern healthcare system, a lot of our healthcare system is the modern allopathic system was set up by the Rockefellers,
Mhm.
and what they set forth was they funded a lot of these universities to make petrochemical pharmaceuticals like the only way, because they had developed the ability to synthesize certain things from pretty much natural biological stuff and be able to use them for treating certain symptoms in people. Um, and so, thus kind of begins this whole giant pharmaceutical industrial complex in the United States. And you watch mainstream television, it's like every other commercial is a pharmaceutical ad in there. It's such a huge industry. And yeah, you can go way back into the foundations of that whole thing. I remember reading a book called Crime and Punishment of IG Farben, which is now like which is Bayer Monsanto, uh, and I think BASF is part of spawning out of that IG Farben. And you know, in that book, it described how um, they were using the leftovers from the aluminum industry with
Mm.
the sodium fluoride as a byproduct of the smelting process. And Prescott Bush, which is George Bush Sr.'s father, he was involved in that, and he was shipping over all that waste material over to Germany with IG Farben and all that. And so, those guys that were doing that kind of stuff back in the day, they were putting fluoride in the water of the concentration camps, finding that it was getting people to be more docile, behave more, become more docile. And so, those the same guys, that company is still around, and now they've got their hands in so many different things in our day-to-day lives with all the chemicals they produce, um all all stemming out of that. So, there's a lot of incentive for these guys to make the make the data show uh that their products are helpful and not overall harmful
Yeah.
to everyone.
And if I'm picking up what you're putting down, not allow the studies their studies to be scrutinized.
Yeah, for third party people, that's why it's always good to dive into these studies, look at who is funding their research, look at the methodology, um and be skeptical.
One thing that I think would be good to consider is the concept of a successful scientific theory. And a scientific theory is completely different from a theory that is used in common use, a layperson's use of theory. Um, the regular use of theory is basically speculation, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with speculation, but a scientific theory has a very specific set of criteria for it, and basically 6 criteria of testable, verifiable, falsifiable, prediction, causation, and data substantiation. And you know, a lot of what we're talking about here gets into the second criteria of verifiable, right? Someone else can take the science experiment, go through it in detail, kind of like what you talk about, Greg, or were the equipment verified, were they calibrated ahead of time, all the methodologies that were used for the analysis and the conclusion, all that is open. And then the concept of falsifiable means, it doesn't mean it's fraudulent. It means the idea that there's a set of conditions that if these conditions are met, shows that the hypothesis is false. And by the way, in doing that, that's a victory in and of itself. Showing a hypothesis to be false is perfectly legitimate. That's not a bad thing. It's showing there's a whole section that we have eliminated, right? We don't have to go down that path anymore. That's a good thing,
Yeah.
And that's just as valid as showing that a hypothesis is good, And the other aspect of is, and this is the corollary to falsifiability, is prediction, right? Every successful scientific theory has to have a prediction, and then has to have data that substantiate the prediction. So we saw this with the general theory of relativity, quantum mechanics theory, quantum field theory, and they all made predictions that were tested sometimes years later. And quantum field theory is the most successful scientific theory that we have. It is verifiable to 15, I think it's 14 or 15 significant digits of precision. And I think it had to do with the electron anomalous dipole moment, right? And the point is that it is able to measure how strong is a magnetic field's effect on an electron spin. And these are really important things. And if we don't demand that our institutions have at least a modicum of that standard that we require for successful scientific theory, then there's not much in the way of reliability in there at all. And I think just the idea of demanding verifiability, demanding a falsifiable set of conditions, and demanding that they put in a prediction ahead of time, just that alone, just those three is humongous. And that would be a victory. But I think, unfortunately, we as a society, maybe all human beings, most human beings, we don't demand that because the problem's so big.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's kind of a systems problem, and it's. I remember talking to Alan Booker about a lot of systems type ideas because he had a background in networking, IT infrastructure type stuff, and but basically you get more of what you incentivize in a system. And so if the incentives are all about having to keep publishing for the sake of publishing papers, to get credibility, to gain more credibility in academia, and to secure more research, then these academics are going to they're pressured to maybe show stuff that maybe not be so ethical in their research findings, or like cherry picking some data, or not holding the strictest criteria in the just pure pursuit of truth, right? Like science really at its core in doing all these experiments is to allow folks to gain a better understanding of the universe and how all this stuff works, and how our world works and how the universe works. And if we're not pursuing that truth in it, then we can go down all kinds of, we can waste a bunch of resources, take us down a bunch of different paths that lead to nowhere, and just basically misallocate a lot of human resources, time, talent, capabilities. Um, Basically a giant energy sink,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and with very little progress being made or new discoveries being created
Yeah. You might know this better than
or
I.
being found.
What's the
Right.
expression in academic field? Publish or die, something along those lines,
Yeah.
right? And I think you summarize that well. You know, and what you're saying is there. I think that there is an inverted um, set of priorities. Of if you're not out there, and you're publishing, then you're dying. You know, and then it's quantity over quality at that point, and I think the incentive is it doesn't matter what the hypothesis is, just get it out there, you know, even if it's a crappy hypothesis. And you know, I kind of want to focus real quickly on this whole idea of, you know, Greg and I we were joking about, you know, is it science? And there's the whole concept of the scientific method, which is a 6-step process of observation, question, hypothesis, um, experimentation, conclusion, and results. I think that's the 6-step process for the scientific method. And you know, if you really look at every step within the 6 steps, it's a pretty rigorous process. So actual science is is a solid methodology. It is the best methodology that we as a species have for understanding the universe. And I think the real problem is where we have individuals who a divert, they split from the scientific process, and then we don't have anyone who's holding them accountable for not actually following the scientific process. And so, you know, there's a pretty rigorous definition of a hypothesis. It must be falsifiable, and this gets into the whole concept of the philosophy of science, which was really studied in great detail by, I think his name is Karl Popper. Um, and you know, I recommend anyone kind of take a look at that. So there's a pretty rigorous definition of a hypothesis, as Greg is pulling up here. There's a rigorous definition of the scientific method, that 6-step process. There's the whole concept of a scientific theory, which is like midway through that first paragraph. Scientific theory, scientific law, etc. These are pretty rigorous definitions and methodologies. And if they're actually studied, then or I'm sorry, if they're actually studied and utilized, then they're very, very powerful. The problem is they're so I'll say restrictive that actually being able to do real science is very difficult, and we can't pump out the level of publication that people think should be out there. It can take a long time to really come up with rigorous hypotheses and then carry out very well written, well devised, true experiments. And they're the real ones are few and far between, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's almost, I do know of some folks that are out there kind of doing their own type of research and kind of crowdfunding it through, you know, different means. There's this really cool guy on YouTube. His name's Alien Scientist is his handle on YouTube. His name's Jeremy Rise, but he started a whole exotic energy lab kind of thing. And, you know, they kind of crowdfund to be able to do some different experiments and do energy type research experiments, energy and gravitics type things on an individual level. But it almost seems like that is probably the way to without having to go through different funding sources like the government or large corporations, large businesses. Is now there is a capability to kind of crowd fund certain types of research, and be able to, I guess, take out some of the bias in the research towards certain institutions anyway. But yeah, I mean, then you need to have like some folks that are familiar with how to document the whole process. We did have a thing in our little research lab is like the difference between just fucking around and doing research is that you write it down,
Right. Well, what's the corollary to that? If you didn't document it, it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point. I like that. I hadn't thought about that. That there is room for the idea or somewhere in the market where these sorts of things can be crowdfunded, right? And I think in some ways it can be done better than some what's done in industry or within the government. One thing I love about science is, in my opinion, science was the original open source. I'll even go as far as say science and mathematics. These are the original open source, and they've been around for, technically, centuries, if not thousands of years, right? At least in terms of some level of formalization. And, we've seen instances throughout history where a person who was not a scientist, not an engineer, they were in the backyard, they were in the garage, and they were doing science, right? And we saw this with Orville and Wilbur Wright. These are bicycle shop owners, and they created the first flight in Kitty Hawk, and it's open source. They were able to do it on their own, and they didn't have to have engineering degrees to do this sort of thing. They leapt above everyone else because of that. So that's a really compelling idea that you're putting forth, Greg.
I think that's kind of that there's a lot of people out there with different channels that are doing their own experiments and reporting on their results through their channels. And there's this really great guy that I follow called Tech Ingredients on YouTube, and he's got to be some kind of like engineering professor or some kind of physics professor or something like that. But he takes you through these different projects that he does, and takes you through the whole thing, and explaining concepts and things like that. And then there's all these different science channels on YouTube as well, like the Smarter Every Day guy. He's actually a local guy around here.
He has a really impressive channel. Very well done.
Where he walks people through the different types of experiments and things that he's doing. And the fun thing about it is like just asking those questions and being curious, right? Like and then showing all the steps involved in doing the stuff. But yeah, I think there's a lot to get out there about people doing their own stuff. And for a long time I thought like that it's probably going to be some folks tinkering around in their backyards that are going to actually create the innovations in the future, because a lot of these institutions are really locked down. Like you might get some incremental advances in certain things, but to a large degree, a lot of these, potential advancements, I believe, are kind of stifled in the mainstream, out in the public, through the corporations and through, academia. They're really kind of pigeonholed. Like they kind of have to stay in their box, because if it goes against the overall narrative of where the direction of the folks that think they're in control, the how have I heard him described before? The powers that should not be, let's say, the powers that should not be, those folks, have a specific direction that they want to steer us all in, and so specific things, especially things that could help humanity flourish, they really get stifled and uh, not allowed to come to light. So a lot of this, if there's going to be any kind of new advancements or discoveries, I think they are going to come from people just messing around with stuff and
Yeah,
showing it to everybody.
yeah, right. And I guess here's the conundrum, because some of these experiments, they're expensive, right? Let's just call it what it is. They're expensive either through the equipment, the materials that are used, and
Yeah,
or the personnel who are needed to actually set them up and execute them. Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
so I respect that any institution, any organization is going to allocate the financial capital to that, and ideally, do it in a way that's
Yeah, because research can be unfruitful a lot of times.
right.
Like we're talking about, if you get to a certain point and you realize that your idea, your hypothesis was totally incorrect, then it's not going to produce anything of value, really. That you I mean, it did produce a value, like we shouldn't go in that direction, we shouldn't keep going in that direction, so that's
Yeah.
valuable. But um like monetary value.
If I could give one fairly well-known example, is the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider.
Yeah.
Sabina Hassenfelder, she's a famous YouTuber. I think she's famous, and she was working on the LHC. And when she started to question the underlying math and physics around this, like what are we really going to get out of this? And she was pilloried. She was really rebuffed on her questioning of this, and she realized, oh, this is a bunch of hooey, and she removed herself from the LHC, and the things that she said were going to happen happened, or more appropriately, the things that she said would not happen did not happen. And the LHC, I mean, as far as I can tell, I'm a total piker at this sort of thing, but as far as I can tell, the only thing that the LHC has actually discovered is the existence of the Higgs particle. Now, that's important. It is a cornerstone of the Standard Model, which is a cornerstone of quantum mechanics and quantum field theory. But we spent billions of dollars globally spent billions of dollars to set up the LHC, and we discovered one particle. Throughout the 60s and 70s, we discovered dozens of particles. And now, granted, that those are low-hanging fruit, but to get to your point, Greg, is you can spend a lot of money and you may not have anything that comes about because of it. And I give Dr. Hassenfelder a lot of credit for saying, wait, we need to have a level of rigor around this thing before we start just building a lot of stuff. And she identifies this in her book, Lost in Math. And she really kind of shows that there's this bias for math, is the language of the universe, and it must have beauty, and that seems to be this driving theme in science, or at least particle physics and high energy physics. Oh, it must conform to this idea of beauty. And he's like, why? That's just an arbitrary thing. Where's that coming from? So, I give her a lot of credit for calling out the bullshit, ahead of time, and really putting her money where her mouth is. She could have gone really far with the LHC, and she's like, no, I'm not going to put my name to this. So, kudos to her. But she's a rare person. She's a rare individual of great integrity, and she's gotten into a lot of public debates, and not very kind debates either, about the whole idea of just how bad the state of cosmology and particle physics are.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking into some of this stuff on the question of how the uh, quantum physics and Einstein's theory of relativity and like people that have been working on different ideas in creating a unified field theory because of the things that we observe. I guess primarily the weird wackiness that happens when the double slit experiment stuff. When you have an observer, it tends to act like a particle, and then when there's no observer, then it acts like a wave, and then Nassim Haramein, that guy. If he started looking into some of that guy's research, and basically it points to there being in ether, what we believe is like empty space is actually, kind of like uh, uh, a geometric kind of superfluid type thing
Mhm.
that is always surrounding us and leads a bunch of different possibilities off of that, of faster than light capability, travel, interconnectedness of all times and all points in space and time. uh a bunch of different possibilities out of that. If what he's talking about is in actuality the what is reality. Um so yeah, I think there's a lot of questions to that. And then specifically with the Large Hadron Collider, in CERN and what they're doing, it is kind of wild because like I have heard theories of them using the particle accelerator. Like the true purpose of it is really to create like metamaterials, so materials that that don't exist and we can't find. We have to fabricate, and some of these things that might be one of the true purposes of some of these particle colliders, is to create these metamaterials. And that's a whole rabbit hole that's pretty fascinating. But on the comical side of things, it's almost like you get a bunch of scientists together and get them to convince people, like a religion, that
Right.
like we have the answer, or we're gonna find the answer. Just give us billions of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
So does that mean that this is the real life version of Star Labs out of DC Comics?
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay. So you're familiar with the character of the Flash out of the DC universe?
Yeah.
So his character, his alter ego is Barry Allen, and he worked at Star Labs, it was a research facility, and a lot of I think what happened to him, there was an accident at Star Labs, and that's what caused him to become the Flash. I think I've got that correct. And so Star Labs in the DC universe is still an active facility, and they talk about metahumans. You talk about metamaterials, right? Metahumans, and out of Star Labs, they're able to create a lot of these metamaterials. It's just I had not heard about this, the idea of LHC being a place for creating metamaterials. So I guess this makes us the real life version of Star Labs.
Well, a lot of these guys, I think, that create a lot of the science fiction and the comic books and the popular culture stuff, they, where are they getting their ideas from? I think, some of this is actually coming from real discussions, actually, and they're taking some of that and throwing it into their fiction. Um, and it really is interesting what the true nature of it. Like, you look at some of the stuff that they did for the, like, ceremonies on opening the CERN over there and the weird kind of ceremonies that they did with that. And it's just strange, like all the stuff that they've done. Have you ever seen that? Like, yeah, it's really wild. Like they had I don't know if I could pull it up here. I'm looking for maybe some videos. CERN opening ceremony might be part of it here. Yeah. Okay. Very, very, very weird, man. Okay, I'm gonna mute this, but
all right, hit me.
All right, let me show you this here. Okay, so this is one of the this is the ceremony they did for when they open CERN. Okay, so yeah. So what's good? So tell me what's going on here. What's really going on here? People in prison suits jumping up chains. Goat headed dudes dancing around. Yeah, really wild stuff, dude. What's the are these guys just doing some kind of occult weird occult esoteric alchemy type stuff and have other purposes for what they're doing, and just this stuff's kind of wild, man, when you start digging into it.
See, I look at that and I think there's a boondoggle in there. Somebody wanted to get paid, to put on a show, right?
Right. Yeah. To be all artsy fartsy and stuff, and
That's right.
do something kind of weird and shocking.
Can we take a break from the topic of the replication crisis?
Yeah.
Maybe, so I wanted to bring up this book here that I got called Beyond AI. I think this was published in 2007, and the subtitle is Creating the Conscience of the Machine. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because Greg and I talked about this like a couple of episodes ago in regards to AI. And I'm only about 40 pages into this book, but I'm really enjoying it. And I think the author, J. Swords Hall, is doing a good job of bringing up the right questions and the right first principles that we need. And, in the same way that as we are to amoeba, AI, artificial superintelligence, ASI, will be to us as we are to an amoeba. And, I'm not saying that we'll be an annoyance, but we may actually become completely without value, without any sort of impact on an ASI. And so, Dr. Hall is trying to lay down the metaphysical, moral, and ethical framework down now, really for the past 20 years, that we should be really trying to have as a framework for trying to make sure that we have these things in place, or at least consciousness of them, before we get to AGI and eventually ASI, artificial general intelligence, and then artificial superintelligence. And then there's the whole aspect of it is this life? Does this meet the definition of life? And we don't really have a good definition. We have a working definition, but we don't have a technical definition of life. And so I think that these things are important, and I think it just kind of goes back to the whole idea of the show that we had 2 or 3 weeks ago around the impact of AI on and our work, right? How does it affect our identity? And if AGI and ASI become so powerful as in some ways for it to transcend Homo sapiens and or to make us irrelevant, what does that mean for us as a species? And have we imbued these AIs, these ASIs, with at least a modicum of ethics, so that way that there is some sort of respect there both ways? And I think these are really important questions. And 99.9% of the population is not even thinking about it. They're not even aware of this sort of thing, this sort of discussion.
I was talking to a coworker earlier, my coworker earlier today, and we got into the discussion of would beings that have like a super, beyond our human intelligence, because I watched the movie Battlefield Earth earlier in the week, and there were these beings that came to Earth and subjugated human beings, and were keeping them around, treating them like getting them to do their mining and stuff for them for some kind of intergalactic merchant thing. But yeah, we were talking about like, why would some kind of super intelligent being want to interact with, being with a lower intelligence? And then it's like, well, don't we do that to the animals and stuff on the planet just for our own, amusement for certain things? Humans do that. And so it brought up the episode of Star Trek where Q interacts with the folks on the Next Generation.
Yep.
Star Trek, where he's like this omnipotent being, and really it's all just for his own amusement, is to mess with the guys on the ship,
Sure.
And so yeah, what would something with a lot more intelligence see us as? And would it want to just keep us around for its amusement or something? I guess I don't know.
Sure. So I want to let's see if I can provide a slightly different perspective on this. So when we talk about, let's say, agriculture and mining, these are very energy intensive industries, very energy intensive endeavors. And for thousands of years we employed other animals for essentially plowing the fields, moving material, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, we don't really do that. In terms of total energy expenditure within agriculture, we don't do that anymore. We don't use animals anymore. We use mechanized, non-living, non-biological material for doing that, whether it be rail or tractor, trucks, vehicles, et cetera, even air, right? Delivery of spraying chemicals is done via helicopter. And then also within mining, there are instances, there was probably, a couple centuries of instances where you have mules that existed almost entirely underground, and they were there just to move material, up from the deep mines up to the surface. We don't do that anymore. We don't use animals because A, they're inefficient, and B, they're really difficult to maintain. And we have mechanisms, steel-based mechanisms for doing that sort of thing. I don't, if I remember correctly, that movie you talked about, was that a John Travolta movie?
Yeah, man. Yeah, John Travolta. Yeah. And it is really interesting looking at it now. When the last time I saw it was probably when I was a teenager or something like that. Yeah. And the stuff that was in there was kind of like Machiavellian. He kind of used his second in command guy kind of as a patsy and kind of double cross, and then there was some double cross stuff going on there.
Yeah, I just think that when it comes to AGI and ASI, that's the last thing they're going to do. If they really need to mine and they need to mine efficiently, the last thing they're going to do is use humans. Because in terms of doing that type of work, we're very inefficient at doing it. We're very energy intensive, and the ratio of output to input is not that great, and the need to maintain a human for that sort of work, it's not great. I can't help but think that from an ASI's point of view, they're going to try to create the most efficient method of getting resources out. And that would be just some sort of machine, right? Steel-based machine, titanium-based machine for doing that sort of thing. And the idea of they keep us around for their amusement. Okay, I get the comedic effect, but I think that would be really dependent upon some sort of a system which has an R complex, which is the lizard brain, and then a limbic system, which is the mammalian brain over the R complex, and that's emotion based, right? And I'm not saying that AGI and ASI are going to be without emotion. I just don't see them being subject to the same lizard brain activity that we are, of insecurities and extreme irrationality that we as humans have done a really good job of exhibiting.
Well, how do we predict what a machine, will operate? Is it only pure logic and something with just pure logic with no emotion? Where does the Isaac Asimov stuff where he was talking about, I guess you create a machine that's a stapler that's becomes its sole purpose is to become a really good stapler, and in order to solve that problem and to be the best stapling machine, it has to eliminate every atom in the universe and reassemble it into staples for the stapler.
Mm-hmm.
So, where does that thinking, how can you predict something like that's thinking? It's like you were talking about with this book, it sounds like the guy is starting to say, we should figure out how to think about embedding some type of moral codes into and ethics into the machines, I guess, as part of it.
Yeah. So I think it's a good description. And my only pushback to what Storrs is, or what Hall's getting at, is we haven't even come up with a good and common definition of morals and ethics amongst the Homo sapiens. How we're supposed to infuse or impose morals and ethics on something else if we haven't even come up with that on our own.
Right. Yeah, talking about this stuff, man, I've had talks with my buddy Robbie about some interesting theories of AI and the possibilities of like if there's like a time travel capability, could there be like a future influence of some super intelligence that has sent itself back into humankind's past in order for its certain development to happen or something like that? Like, if we don't believe time, or if we lose the whole time is linear thing, and there is some kind of computer that could, tap into the space time and manipulate it in some way, if that's a possibility. And I actually ran across a guy, the Higher Side Chats podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of it. I don't think I've ever tuned in.
But there was a guy on there that was talking about, some of this stuff recently, and it was pretty interesting. If folks want to check that out, this Harold Kautz Vela guy, he was getting into some of that kind of stuff. It was interesting. as a something to check out.
That's cool.
But I kind of lost where we were. We were talking a little bit about the AI, getting into the AI, and
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring up just something that Greg and I talked about is the possibility of as we see more stories coming about and they pertain to past episodes, maybe we just take a minute to say, hey, this is some of the latest development. Now, granted, this book is not a latest development. It came out 20 years ago, but I just wanted to bring up some of my personal experience with it. I think the author, Dr. Hall, is doing a great job, or has done a great job of talking about this. And in some ways, this is the corollary book to The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. Ray, just did an awesome job, and he's been tracking this for over 30 years. He's a futuristic technologist, and he's been talking about the singularity coming about. He had the book, The Age of Intelligent Machines, then The Age of Spiritual Machines, and then The Singularity is Near. And the latest book he came out with is Singularity is Nearer. And so these are the first principle arguments for why the singularity is going to come about. And I don't think he addresses much around morals and ethics. That doesn't mean he thinks it's unimportant. That wasn't his focus. So I think that beyond AI is the other side of that is, yes, the singularity is probably coming. How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to impart, morals and ethics? And another question, I think he addresses this, and the other people have as well, is we need to be really careful about looking at AI as just a tool for Homo sapiens. We may end up creating life out of this, and we need to be prepared for that. That's a very serious question, and I think a lot of people are not even considering that because they have, I'm going to say, the bias that life can only be on a biological substrate. It cannot be on a silicon-based substrate.
How did you run across this author?
Oh man, I wish I could remember. I want to say I may have been listening to another podcast talking about this, and they recommended Beyond AI. I wish I could remember, but I got this book a few months ago actually, and I'm going through my library, I'm cataloging everything, and I saw that I had this book on my shelf. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I had this. I want to read it. So really enjoying it, and unfortunately, I'm in the middle of like 6 books. I really need to focus and finish them. But
I'm the same way. Yeah.
But I just think he's done a great job, and I think Ray Kurzweil, he reviewed the book. This is a must-read for anyone interested in the future of the human-machine civilization. So I wish I could remember.
That's usually how I come across my books is through podcasts and somebody referring to some book to check out.
Yeah.
I'll check that one out.
Yeah. Unfortunately I get to listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of broadcasts, and I hear so many recommendations. I have more books on my shelf I have not read than ones I have read. And
it's a problem.
It is, right.
I have the same problem. It's a good problem.
So
I think it's a good problem. Yeah.
Here's my thinking about this is, first of all, I just like having it, right? It's like channel surfing, right? I can just go to my library like, oh, that looks cool. Let me get that. I forgot I got that like 5 years ago. And then the other thinking, and I think everyone in the audience will appreciate this. I know, Greg, you'll appreciate it. When the fit hits the shan, and we don't have much in the way of YouTube and internet, I don't need batteries for this. All I need is a good lamp and some sunlight, and I can read that.
Yep. Probably candlelight, because during the day you're gonna have to be working your ass off.
Yeah, right. True.
If we don't have any of that stuff,
that's right.
Working.
As my dad used to tell me,
working our asses off.
He worked on a farm. He did chicken coops. He had to raise chickens, and he told me, he says, we had to work from can till can't, meaning from when the sun was up till the sun was down, you were working, because you had the free light.
Yeah, you got to use the light. Yep. It's funny. I saw this very strange movie recently. It was about like the United States ran all their machines off of chicken shit, and it was a comedy. It was just like this really weird comedy about like these alien twins, and it was like really strange. But the funniest part was just like everything runs off of chicken shit, which I think is like, they're being silly because, I guess that was a term for you ain't worth a damn, as if you were
Right.
chicken
Yeah.
shit,
Yeah. I think they did a good, sound like they did a good job of picking the comedy, the allegory there.
Yeah, it was so silly because it was like the Chinese had gotten like super technologically advanced, and then they like shrunk themselves down so that they were like super tiny, but then they like were flying around, and like it was so funny. It was like a fortune cookie UFO was the freaking Chinese like thing or whatever. It was I think it was back in the day. It was a really odd, like weird movie, but it was like a weird
That's funny. That's actually,
comedy movie.
That's actually interesting. So that would be the comedic version of the series in the book, Three Body Problem, right?
Yeah.
The trisolarans, and it sounds as if I understand correctly, the actual trisolarans are about the size of a grain of rice. That's how I understand how it was explained to me in a couple of videos. And so they may have started big, but they end up becoming much smaller, and they had actually end up running almost as a hive mind. So that's just funny that you're referencing them.
Yeah, it was a weird B movie, but it was like I was just looking at some of the things that they were doing in it, and it was kind of funny.
That's great.
Another thing you brought up that I thought was pretty interesting pre-show was getting into how I guess some of these facial recognition things are now being used with TSA or something like that. You sent this thing about these ICE images of agitators.
Yeah.
Are now getting tied into the TSA and TSA pre-check
stuff.
Oh,
right. Because we covered flock cameras a few months ago. I knew nothing about this, and you brought this up as a show topic, and when you first told me about it, I'm like, what the flock is a flock camera, right?
Yeah.
Once I started researching, I'm like, oh my gosh, Greg's right. He picked a good topic. So I thought you did a good job of picking up the topic, and I thought that this kind of ties into the spirit of what you were trying to get at before. Is you have all these databases, and they can be brought together, whether they're brought together under a single institution or they're brought together through a loose federation. Whatever it is, the effect is still the same, right? And the ability for you have one data access point allows there to be access to multiple data points, and they can harmonize or bring together these different sources, and you end up having the ability to go from one video or picture to creating an effect across a multitude of areas, like your ability to dox people, in real time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another point in this is recently I'm subscribed to this lady Miriam Hanine, and she put about a book out about the George Floyd, everything that went down with George Floyd, called Operation George Floyd. And I've got to dive into it, but I recently had one of her newsletters come across my email, and in her newsletter, she was saying that she was flagged by an automated thing by the U.S. Postal Service for her business,
Yeah.
and was trying to reach a physical person and was having a lot of difficulty, and her business just got flagged under some automated thing, and it's very difficult for her to get any kind of resolution for it right now. And so it's just kind of one of these things that I think these things are happening in the background to people that are, attempting to um, disrupt the government's main narratives, and they're kind of the canaries in the coal mine of being affected by making your life just harder and more difficult to use online tools for your
Yeah.
business and things like that, and getting flagged by automated systems where you don't have a human that you can interact with. And so it's just kind of making it a little harder for people to kind of push back in the system. But
The process is the punishment.
yeah, when you make it so difficult to do things, it just gets to where people just want to comply so that they don't have to go through all the harassment.
Yep.
So
Yep.
So let's check this out real quick.
For airport security had been revoked, with a message telling her that she may have been found in violation of.
Let me restart this to see if it'll play the whole thing.
An ICE protester says that her global entry and TSA pre-check privileges were revoked 3 days after an incident in which an ICE agent scanned her face while she was observing them on the streets. Ars Technica is reporting that 56-year-old Minnesota resident Nicole Cleland was volunteering with a group that tracks potential ICE and Border Patrol vehicles in the neighborhood when she observed a white Dodge Ram being driven by federal agents. She said she followed the car for a short time from a safe distance when two other vehicles being driven by federal agents stopped in front of the Dodge Ram and blocked her path. An agent then exited the vehicle and told her that they had performed facial recognition on her and said that she was impeding their work, warning that if she did it again, she would be arrested. She drove away, and then 3 days later, she received an email notification that her global entry and TSA pre-check privileges for airport security had been revoked, with a message telling her that she may have been found in violation of customs and immigration regulations. Federal agents have been known to be using this facial recognition software during these recent raids. Cleland has since filed a declaration about ICE's actions with the district court in Minnesota. We're going to stay on top of this all and more, so spread the word and follow for more. So this is a shocking story. An ICE protester says that her.
So here's the thing that really gets me with this sort of thing, is that the government doesn't have to use active measures to punish people. They in place passive measures. We're not going to stop the person from leaving their house and driving to the airport, and buying tickets, right? That would take active measures. All they have to do is say, no, you're not allowed to get on the plane. That's it.
Right.
So they create these artificial filters, and then when a person doesn't meet the criteria for the filters, they just say, no, you cannot go to the next filter. That's all they have to do. The process becomes the punishment, and I have my thoughts about these so-called ICE protesters. But that's a whole other thing. I'm going to take it at face value that this lady was not actively interfering with ICE investigations or ICE law enforcement. I'm gonna start from there, right? And whether she did it actively or she was just a neighbor who just happened to be in the area, and a flock camera or an ICE agent camera, got an image of a person and who just happened to be in the area, right? And next thing you know, it goes through the chain, and bam, you can no longer fly, you can no longer use pre-check, all these sorts of things. There is no adjudication process. It's just, accusation, guilt. That's it, right? And so I have a huge problem with that. And if you think about it, this is, effectively speaking, this is no different than what happened on January 6th, 2020, where we had geofencing happening. People who were visiting DC on that day, and they happen to have their phone with them, and they happen to be within proximity of a cell phone tower that was in proximity of the protests, the J6 protests. People had nothing to do with the J6 protests or the trespassing. And next thing you know, they're being investigated for crimes. And there is no adjudication process. It's you're guilty until proven innocent. And I think this is the same spirit of that whole thing. And it goes back to flock cameras like you brought about, Greg.
Yeah, it makes me think of that Black Mirror episode Nosedive of the the social credit system, basically.
Yeah, right.
And and what China is doing with the social credit system.
Yep.
And so, you know, all these things of you being some kind of a dissident towards the system, you know, you're getting logged. And the thing is that, like we're talking about, it's like an auto flag happening with these computer systems and AI. And it's there's little recourse of you speaking to an actual person. And you know, it's like if you just have the computers with no other person to double check that stuff, and it's just sending you and sorting you into different areas, then you know you really don't have recourse. And it's just a little bit of this nosedive thing. And what was that one? Was it Sylvester Stallone and Sandra Bullock?
Yeah,
that other sci-fi movie?
Demolition Man.
Demolition Man. It's like Nosedive and Demolition Man going on.
Yep. I've only seen 2 or 3 episodes, but this is one of the episodes I saw. Really good episode. And very predictive of what's coming about. And yeah, 100% agree about China. They have ruined their population, and it's coming out in the demographic numbers, right? Is they ain't making any more kids over there.
Yeah. Well, there's some freaky things too, like being it, you know, all the functions, a lot of your functions happen through that WeChat app.
Yeah,
in
right.
China, and you have to use your face for it, and then it needs like your face in a certain position or whatever. And
right.
I remember seeing one story where it was like a grandma needed to get access to her funds, and the only way you could access the funds was through the facial recognition, and it needed her to be in like a certain coherent state to have the camera up there to be able to release and unlock the thing so she could get access to her funds. And they couldn't get it figured out. And then it's like, well, if you can't verify with this, there's no other option, because it's all handled just by the AI. There's like not a person you can call. It's just all handled internally within that app. So it's like, you know, when you remove the human from the equation, there's nothing to double check. It's just kind of going rogue on all this stuff. And I have been hearing multiple stories about people having to sue because there's some kind of facial recognition and it's screwed up.
Yeah.
And it put them in some kind of crime that they didn't do, and then they had to prove, basically they were guilty until they proved themselves innocent.
Yep.
And so so multiple stories coming out about that kind of stuff. So
when my mom and I visited China with my my uncle and aunt, you know, they had gone there. My uncle and aunt had gone to China several times, but this was going to be my first time visiting China and my mom's first time in many years visiting China. And you know, we were so used to paying cash for stuff, especially the local currency. We just assumed, you know, China's the same way. We didn't understand how bad it was in 2017. So almost a full decade ago, we would go to a restaurant. It's like, oh, we're just paying cash. And my uncle says, no, you better have a phone, and it better have, you know, I think it was WeChat even back then. You better have WeChat on there, or else you ain't paying. And that was like 99% of the vendors out there, whether it be a nice restaurant, a mediocre restaurant, or even a street vendor, probably 98.9% of transactions had to go through some sort of electronic source. You could not pay with cash. Even if you offered, they had no means of clearing the transaction. They had no point of sale that could actually take cash. And thankfully we were, with him so he could take care of it. And, we just whacked it up at the end of the trip. But yeah, they want everything funneled through this one centralized source. And even though technically speaking, WeChat may not have been created by the CCP, they were definitely controlled by the CCP. It was just it was a massive lake of data they could just mine, ad hoc, ad infinitum.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just basically an all-in-one app that does like everything, like your Facebook, social media.
Yep.
It does all your payments. It does all your messaging, sharing photos, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, on one side it seems convenient, right? And then on the other, it's like you don't have any anonymity with any of your payments, and then it's all through this little phone, and it's basically just tracking everything, every single thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I remember reading one story about why they went, or where they started going cashless, and they started to go cashless in a lot of different areas in China. And it was really messing up the people that were trying to steal cash, because they were going to these places and not able. There was like no physical cash there that they could steal. So
that reminds me of a popular bumper sticker I saw back in the 80s and 90s. Said, "Don't steal. The government hates competition."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's So yeah, I guess they claim that that's a benefit, that you can't have people showing up to steal cash, I guess.
Well, why have it at the retail level when you can have it at the wholesale level of the government?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And think about it. So, I think you're bringing up a good comedic point here is, okay, yeah, we don't have individuals who are stealing money, but we have government which can steal other things. It can steal people's, I'm going to say innocence. I don't mean like their youth, but their legal innocence. It can steal their legal innocence. It can impose guilty verdicts on people in mass without any sort of adjudication. It can funnel people through certain processes, right? I remember when COVID was really bumping and grooving, and when someone wanted to go on a plane or a train to travel, they actually had to have an app that would come up, and it would say if the person was authorized or not authorized to get on a train or a plane. And if it flashed green, they could get on. If it flashed red, they could not get on. That sort of thing. So that's a form of theft. It's a theft of rights. It's a theft of the right to travel. And when the government does it, it's okay. But if a person does it, then it's bad.
Yeah. I came across a meme from Lysander Spooner recently. This a man's natural rights are his own, the whole world, and any infringement of them is equally a crime, whether committed by one man or by millions.
Yeah, totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it doesn't matter the source. It's still violation of the rights and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
Yeah, Lysander Spooner.
So getting back to the replication crisis, so for the audience, Greg and I we were part of a local gathering of friends. It was we were rendering beef tallow, and there's a good friend of ours, John, who was there. And John brought up a great point around the loss of credibility of the so-called experts. And he went on for a few minutes about it, and he was 100% right. Just the idea that we've all experienced, I think the majority of us have experienced that we've seen these institutions that 20, 30, 40 years ago we've trusted, and now they've become so corrupted because they don't have any sense of ethics. They don't have any sense of metaphysics, first principle rational thinking, and their sources and methodologies are totally opaque. They don't provide any transparency for this sort of thing, and they've lost all credibility. And I think that just regular people have lost trust. And we take a look at polls around the mainstream media and polls around Congress, and we're talking about, the last numbers I saw was like 17% trust rate. It may be lower than that by now on mainstream media and Congress. That's pretty low, and so what would that be, like 1 in 7? Only 1 in 7 people actually trust these institutions. And then you add in all these other NGOs and so-called pharmaceutical groups, etc. The ones that in some ways we hand over our lives, we hand over our trust because we're trying to offload some of these things that we can't do on our own. And I think John's frustration is very well placed, and I think he stated it well. I wish he were here. He could represent himself better. And I think that this is what the whole replication crisis comes down to, is exactly this, right? It's not just the ability to reproduce certain scientific experiments. It's a crisis in credibility. That's what this whole thing comes down to. And if we, as a society, as a American society or global society, cannot trust these institutions, we got bigger problems, And I think that that's what this really comes down to. And I hope the audience is kind of picking that up here, is that now all of us have to become philosophers in our own way. We all have to really get plugged into what are solid methodologies. We all have to start understanding just the basics of statistics, statistical analysis, and probabilities. We all have to understand at a basic level, what is science? What is good science? What is bad science? What is pseudoscience? And it kind of sucks that we have to do that. But maybe the positive outcome, and I'll just end it with this, maybe the positive outcome of this whole thing is we have to own our shit. We all have to own, 3 meters around us, I think, and maybe that's the positive lesson of this whole thing.
I 100% agree, man. We really do have to become a lot more well-rounded and critical thinking. And for a long time, we have, like you just said, like we've exported a lot of our thinking to the so-called experts, and thinking that there are people that do care for the overall flourishing of humanity and well-being of everyone in society. And time again, we're proven that we've been being lied to on many different levels. And once you realize that you can begin to take action in your own life and start to claim more personal responsibility over your life. And a lot of that is by doing the work of diving into subjects and doing your own critical thinking and research and looking into things deeper and asking more questions, instead of being led down, a path of doom. And it was kind of funny. It was got a group of guys that I hang out with on Wednesday nights, and one of the guys is an older guy. He's in the boomer generation. And he made the comment one night, because we were all hanging out talking about, I think the moon landing. We were all questioning the moon landing and stuff. And he was telling us, like, y'all's generation is got more of these theories than anybody I've run across. And it was myself that chimed in, and there's some of the other guys that are around my age are like, we're just tired of being lied to, man.
Yeah.
There's just so many of these things that have with our access to the information on the internet,
Yeah.
and then just in our own personal lives, in our dealings with things, and seeing how the system just doesn't serve justice equally across the board, and how things are operating. We're just putting two and two together, man, and just asking more questions because we've just seen the lies on so many levels, man.
Yeah.
That it's just too hard to ignore. They're in your face. It's just in your face all the time. I remember they had back when the U.S. was trying to drum up some kind of war in Syria. They had played on CNN footage from the largest machine gun shoot that happens in Kentucky, of the Knob Creek machine gun shoot that happens in Kentucky, where they're because I've been there, so I was like, I remember watching that footage that was coming out, and it was being covered off of by a lot of folks on different alternative media guys. And seeing that footage, it was just like, that was the nighttime machine gun shoot at Knob Creek. They just inserted this into the CNN news feed, saying that there was all this stuff happening in Syria that the U.S. needed to respond to. And it was just so comical, man. They just used B-roll footage from Knob Creek machine gun shoot, the night shoot that happens at Knob Creek every year, where they just put tracer rounds and then they just blow up shit downrange, It was so funny, man. It was like almost immediate, like people online were just being like, this is from Knob Creek, dude.
I love
Like, this is such bullshit.
Yeah.
So,
That loss of credibility is I think that's the overall lesson out of this whole thing, and while I appreciate what your friend was saying, the older gentleman was saying, I think that, people from about my age and younger were justified, maybe not in the conclusions, but were justified in the immediate default of distrust. Or mistrust even, right? I think we're perfectly justified. And for the audience, Greg, when we were getting ready for the show, we were talking about the whole idea of the Epstein files, right, being released to the public. And Greg brought up a good point. He's like, you just watch, no one's going to get arrested for this, and Greg, I bet you're right. Who's going to be arrested, right? Ghislaine Maxwell, she's already been arrested, right? So whatever, that's done. Who else is going to get arrested? And I think it's just the idea of a lack of accountability. It's the idea that frauds can be perpetrated on the American public and the world at large, and that there will be no one either arrested criminally, charged and prosecuted and convicted, or no one is going to be brought forth in a civil trial either, right? And those are the two basic areas right there. And there's definitely not going to be a governmental agency that either uses its regulatory power or the DOJ using its criminal power to bring someone to justice. That's not going to happen. And I think just the general idea, people are just sick and tired of this whole idea of
a two-tiered justice system.
Yeah, two-tier justice system is, don't feed me shit and call it sugar, right? We're sick and tired of it. And I think it's just that immediate distrust. Now, I will say, again, trying to create the silver lining here, maybe that's the good part, is the immediate suspicion of, centralized power. And I bet you the founding fathers are looking down at us right now and says, thank goodness you finally get the point of why we wanted the Constitution, right? It's just that immediate suspicion, not just skepticism, but outright suspicion of highly centralized powers, but why? Because it's one group of people telling another group of people what they should and should not do with their lives, and now we're starting to see the second and third order knock-on effects of, a small group of people not being held accountable for their actions.
And if you've done any kind of self-improvement work or looked into the the process of self-improvement and looking at yourself in a critical way, and even governing yourself, which is probably one of the most challenging things, is to take the right actions towards fulfilling yourself in becoming the highest possible, the best version of yourself. Like, even governing the self is such a huge challenge for a human being. Like, can somebody that has no control over the self even be in any kind of capability of being responsible for being in control of other people?
Yeah.
So, and it's like so many people are so out of control with themselves internally, that how could you even think about dictating what's right for other people? I mean,
Yeah.
And I heard this recently on somebody's podcast, but it was really, I think, when you kind of get down to the core of how humanity can move forward in a positive direction, I do think it is that individual pursuit of self-improvement and continuous self-improvement and personal assessment of figuring out how you can become a better person. That can have a ripple effect on all the other people around you if you improve yourself. Just being that kind of light for other people, through your example, and setting standards for yourself, and then following through with them. It's not easy. It's very difficult to hold yourself, to a higher level, and to kind of feel the pain of going through, actually taking a good self-assessment and saying, you have a lot of lack in certain areas, and that you can improve on them, and that that can be hard to do. It can be hard to do.
Yeah.
Is to take an honest self-assessment and then work
Yeah.
on yourself.
We as a species are very good at fooling ourselves in a really wide variety of different topics. And I think this starts to move a little bit into the Jungian school of thought, in terms of like the conscious and the unconscious, right? The shadow, all of our insecurities, which kind of in this dark lake below, and the ego kind of sits on top of that, and it's kind of the go-between from our unconscious and conscious, right? And it's very good at telling us what we want to hear to placate ourselves. On a quick side note, there's a great movie called Revolver with Ray Liotta and Jason Statham, which I recommend. Kind of gives in this topic, and just I think it came out in 2006. Great movie, really enjoyed it. I don't want to go into it because I don't want to go into detail, because the ending is really good. But suffice it to say that it's such a good someone look at, not an analog, allegory, or it's like an analog to this whole idea. And
Okay.
and I didn't know Jason Statham had the acting chops, and he did a really good job. Everyone did. Had Vincent Pastore from The Sopranos was in there. Yeah, so everyone did a great job in this movie.
Okay. Yeah, I've never seen this.
Yeah, it's really good. And I think there are two versions. There was the theatrical version, and I think there's a director's cut or something like that. If you can, watch the longer version. It has some extra parts in there. which really put the cherry on top. That explains what the movie is about.
Hmm.
Yeah. So for
I'll check
you
that out.
youngians out there, I recommend it.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, you had some different examples in here of this I guess kind of um reproducibility crisis.
You mean like specific examples of like fraud or non-reproducibility? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, you had a few of them, and you have the anthropogenic global climate change is one of the examples.
Yeah. So okay, so this is So thanks for bringing this up. So AGCC, anthropogenic global climate change, also known as man-made, so-called man-made global climate change, and so the notes I put out there is there's no such thing as scientific consensus, right? That's not how science happens. This is not a democracy. If that were the case, then the Einsteinian notions of special relativity and general relativity would never come out, because he was completely antithetical to the classical physics, the Newtonian mechanics of the time. Also, we routinely hear about this whole idea of 98% of scientists agree that AGCC is real. Well, excuse my French, but that's just utter malarkey, right? That's just total bullshit. I got into a recent debate with a buddy of mine about this, and he absolutely insisted, and I've heard other people tell this to me personally, that there is a letter, there's a poll of 98% of scientists. I said, no, there's not. There is no poll out there of 98% of scientists. And I say, I challenge you to show me that. Then they use the moving the goalpost logical fallacy. Then they say, well, 98% of climate scientists. I said, well, that's not true. There was no poll of 98% or 100% of climate scientists. That didn't happen, right? And I said, by the way, if it did, just show it to me. And it's, well, I don't have it with me right now. It says, I will wait and I'll let you do the research right now. If it's this obvious, if this patently obvious, you should be able to find it lickety split, on the web somewhere, because it is one of the most popular political hot buttons of our time. And 100% of the time, every person fails to show me that, right? Also with this, talk about the idea of scientific theory, falsifiability and predictions. The IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN's official body on so-called AGCC, the IPCC models, which are about 36, 37 of these, either do not provide falsifiable conditions nor predictions, right? When they do meet their conditions, they say that the predictions are merely delayed. So if they say, oh, we're going to go up 1 degree centigrade, by, let's say, 2010, right? And when it doesn't happen, it says, oh, well, it's just delayed, but it's still going to happen. Well, then your hypothesis falls apart. You just need to say, look, the hypothesis is wrong. We're going to go back and we're going to propose another hypothesis. But they can't do that, right? Because the moment you say the hypothesis is wrong, everything else falls apart, especially all of the political fallout from this. And as a consequence, all of the taxation and economic policies, those all have to be either at a minimum delayed or scrapped. And they can't do that because they're all invested in this. Right?
Right.
That's one that's really important. And, I'm sad to see it's taken almost 40 years for this to come about, but we're finally starting to see that the public is beginning to push back and say, we're not saying you're wrong, but we just don't believe you. You have not met your burden of proof to show that this is you have any sort of veracity with your claims, And the other thing about this, if I could go on a real quick side note about the 37 models that the IPCC uses, how can you have 37 different models? you better pick one model, and it better be right. By saying there's 37 models, by definition, that's everyone is only 3% of a prediction. No, that's bullshit. And
well, each of their models have different criteria,
yeah,
I guess, and
yeah,
so
they all have basically.
How can you compare one to the other? I guess
That's right. So there's two parts to this. Every model has basically two parts. You have your inputs, and then you have your actual mathematical models that are there. So they all have different inputs, not just the number or the types of inputs, but the numbers that they're choosing for every input, right? Those are different. And then the statistical finite element analysis models that they're using, those are completely different.
Those are all different too.
Well, you know what they're going to do is the ones that don't meet the predictions, they just throw them away and pretend they never happened in the first place, right? And the ones that quote unquote went out and say, yeah, see, this is the one we wanted from the very beginning. No, that's not science. That's postdictive. That's not predictive, And so I think people are finally starting to understand, finally get this whole idea of, heads I win, tails you lose. They're starting to get sick of it, and they're starting to realize every time you make these predictions, they fall apart. There's a great website called, I think it's called junkscience.com by Stephen Malloy, and he's been documenting this for a long time, probably 20 years now, and showing prediction after prediction after prediction has fallen apart. And they show, we were supposed to have this event happen by 2010, 2015, 2020. And, New York was going to be underwater, all stuff. They fall apart every single time. And every time, we talk with so-called climate scientists or environmentalists about this, where they say, oh, it's still right, it's just delayed. No, that's not science. You don't get to claim that. Yeah, there you go. It's a great website. It does a good job of providing both a high-level viewpoint and then also giving a view into the details. And it goes into what you talked about, Greg, is what is the source data? What is your methodology, right? And
yeah.
you don't have that, you have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is so important. And, kudos to this guy. I'm sure he has been excoriated front to back, top to bottom, left to right, and his personal life is probably trashed because of this, but he stays on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool.
Another one that I really appreciate is there's a book called The China Study.
Oh, yeah. I was just pulling that one up because
mm-hmm.
that is interesting to me.
And out of this, there was a movie called Forks Over Knives. It came out 2011, 2012. And basically, it was trying to promote a plant-based whole food diet. And the China study, very, very quickly summarized, was supposed to be a countrywide longitudinal study that was implemented, I think, by Premier Zhou Enlai. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and he wanted his final gift to the country would be to have a study that showed that eating less animal product and more plants was healthy. And there were two gentlemen in the West that came forth, and they tried to run with the China study. Campbell and there was another gentleman. They were the ones who kind of helped create the movie Forks Over Knives, and they tried to put forth this idea that meat causes cancer and plants turn off cancer, right? No one's been, and they actually pointed to a study that basically, you can turn cancer on and off with plants. No one's been able to reproduce this. That's the first part. And then with the China study, no one's been able to reproduce that, right? And I think we know, when it comes to the CCP, I'm not blaming China. I'm not blaming the Chinese people. I'm blaming the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party. When it comes to honesty and truthfulness and transparency, they're not exactly high on the list. All right. And no one has been able to reproduce the results of the quote unquote China study. And, and we're seeing more and more instances of the exact opposite. Low carb diets, when it comes to nutrition and epidemiology, low carb diets are probably one of the most, probably in the top 5 studied diets in the world. I'm not saying animal-based, carnivore-based. I'm just saying low carb diets. Probably the most, if not one, or one of the most, if not the most studied diets in the world. And that means, by definition, cutting out plants. And it is, the evidence is overwhelming and is highly reproducible that low carb diets have some of the best results out there. And that is reproducible. These plant-based whole food diets, their results are not reproducible. And the reason why I'm harping on this so much is because this gets into the 4 food groups. When I was a kid, they talked about the 4 food groups. And then somewhere in the late 90s, I think it changed to the food pyramid. A lot of grains, a lot of leafy greens. Yeah. And they conveniently leave out the whole concept of oxalates, which are highly toxic to humans, plant-based defense chemicals, which are toxic to humans, anti-nutrients, which are toxic to humans, and fiber, which are toxic to humans. They conveniently leave all that out, but that causes downstream problems when it comes to things such as dietary recommendations by a centralized authority, aka the federal government. It affects the military, right? Because of the type of food that they're feeding the troops. It has to do a lot with SNAP, food stamps, and the type of food that's promoted. We are seeing these effects with the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, CDC, FDA, right? The recommendations they're putting out are saying these high carb diets, they're fine, not a problem. It's the meat that's a problem. That causes cancer, and we have no reproducibility to show that that is the case. And now we have huge swaths of the planet that are being affected by this because of fraud, just out and out fraud.
Yeah. I mean, you can see that the results by yourself. I mean, I've seen it with people that I've encountered. There was one woman that I met when I went to a conference, the Anarchapulco conference in 2020 in Mexico. This lady was a vegan for a lot of her life, but she had all these like bad skin conditions and really bad eczema and stuff that she couldn't get rid of, and she was doing all these Accutane and all this stuff to help fix it. And then she switched over to primarily like you said, low carb, primarily carnivore kind of diet, and all of her skin cleared up. Like you could visibly see the difference in how she looked. Like her skin, she looked a lot healthier. Like before she looked kind of anorexic, and then after this, like she actually looked like she was healthy, had really clear skin, hair was a lot healthier. Her hair and nails are like super healthy. She said she had really brittle nails. So it's like, you can even run the experiment yourself, just change your diet and run that experiment and see the differences in how you feel, and test it for yourself. But yeah, that's a really good point for people, wanting to navigate, is to, look around you and test it out for yourself and just ask more questions, man.
Yeah, I will tell you from my personal experience, going from a standard American diet to a carnivore diet, and probably 95% in that range. Brain fog is gone. My skin's a lot better. My energy levels are very, very consistent. I don't have the mid-morning and mid-afternoon dips. Huge benefits. And it also, I don't give a rip about my cholesterol levels. Doesn't bother anymore. You know, we don't know about this. Here's something else, right? If I could pile on here, we saw, you know, you have to have your cholesterol levels at 220 or below. Then it became 200 or below. And just recently, like 2 or 3 years ago, they said, oh, it has to be 180 or below. Well, which one is it? You know, what was your methodology that caused you to say 220? What was your methodology that caused you to say 200? And what was your methodology that caused you to say 180? Which methodology am I supposed to trust here? You know, and why is it that we didn't see ancient Homo sapiens going around with what's that the anti-cholesterol medication, statins? They didn't need statins.
Those are those a blood thinner?
Statins are the cholesterol lowering medication. It's an extract from red yeast rice. And so, you know, ancient Homo sapiens did not worry about macronutrients, and they didn't worry about having to take statins, you know, and yet we didn't see issues of acute myocardial infarction, aka heart attack. We didn't see problems with pulmonary plaque. We didn't see issues with coronary heart disease, coronary artery disease, not until the mid 20th century. You know, with the most famous case being President Dwight D. Eisenhower. You know, and the first reported instance of heart attack, AMI, acute myocardial infarction, was, I think, in around 1920, 1930, something like that. Prior to that, heart attacks were not a thing, you know, and so, you know, this wasn't until the advent of seed oils, right, and the push for plant-based whole food diets. Well, who was pushing that? Post, Kellogg, right? These groups were pushing these things, and it wasn't an issue until someone manufactured it as an issue. Prior to that, high meat diets, which are high fat, meat and protein, low carbohydrate diets. That is the ancestrally appropriate, biologically adapted diet.
Jay, you don't even have to think about it, dude. The experts already figured it out, man.
That's right.
So, yeah, with that, man, I think that'll probably wrap up the show for tonight. So if you got any other kind of closing remarks or anything like that, where can people find you? Where can people check out what you got going on?
Yeah, closing remarks. I know this stuff it's not easy. All right. And I'm a bit of a nerd. Greg's a bit of a nerd, right? We both have our degrees in mechanical engineering. So we greatly appreciate these methods that are out there. And I think we both appreciate that other people are not in this. We completely understand it. That said, from a purely selfish, purely self-preservation point of view, I would implore everyone to just begin to look into the ideas of the scientific method, just the basics of metaphysics, just the basics of being properly skeptical, right? It's so important. And if you want your life to be better, if you want to have a healthier life, if you want the people around you, your friends and family, to have healthier lives, you know, look into the stuff. And it's important. And we don't. I'm not going to get conspiracy theories about this, but we're not trained in this stuff in grade school, high school, college, nearly as much as we should be. And so it's incumbent upon all of us outside of the system, outside of the matrix, to do the research. And the information is out there. It's not that hard to find. It just takes a little bit of motivation to look into it. So I would implore everyone just to make best efforts to look into this. For me, if you want to split yourself out of the system, you want to eject out of the matrix, if you want to take the red pill, or more appropriately, the orange pill, join us over at meetup.com. Look up Bitcoin, Huntsville, Crypto, and Coffee. You can see the scroll at the bottom of the screen. Bitcoin, Huntsville, Crypto and Coffee, meetup.com. It's a great group of friends and some of our family. We try to help everyone understand why Bitcoin is so important. If you excuse my French, the moniker I've come up with is fiat fucks us, money makes us. And Bitcoin is actually the first true form of money we've ever had. And we want to help everyone understand what Bitcoin is, how it works under the hood, and why it's so important for every single person. If we as a planet can get back onto a hard money standard, not much unlike when we were on the gold standard and or a bimetallic gold silver standard, this is when we have the greatest amount of flourishing and innovation in human history, from about 1252 to about 1913. And I think that Bitcoin will be the method by which we constrain governments, states, to get back to their true proper role, which is the protection, the defense of individual liberties and contracts. Anything beyond that is an encroachment on our individual liberties. And I think that Bitcoin is going to be the path that gets us there. So join us over at Bitcoin Huntsville, Crypto and Coffee on meetup.com. And I think you'll like what you see.
Well, excellent, Jay. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and having these discussions. And folks, if you like this, please like, share, subscribe. Let other people know about these shows, and do some critical thinking and hang around, and we'll keep diving into this stuff. So we'll catch you guys next time, and we'll see you later.
Thank you, friends.
Peace. Yeah.